What if the very thing that drives every human action, love, achievement, art, even war, is not life, but our fear of death? What if everything we build, dream, or destroy is our way of pretending we'll live forever? In this groundbreaking masterpiece, Ernest Becker tears open the human soul to reveal the truth we all deny, that beneath our pursuit of meaning lies a desperate attempt to escape the terror of mortality. Welcome to the denial of death. Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death begins not as an abstract academic text, but as a man's final confrontation with his own mortality. Dying of cancer, Becker lived the very philosophy he wrote about, using his own impending death to prove the courage of his ideas. The book's central thesis is profound yet simple. The fear of death is the fundamental driving force behind human behavior. Becker argues that nearly all human activity, from art and religion to science and heroism, is an elaborate strategy to deny our own mortality. While ancient societies celebrated death as a passage to eternity, modern humans have lost this comfort. We have no ritual, no shared belief to absorb the terror of dying. And so, we build symbolic systems, ideologies, careers, families to convince ourselves that we matter, that we will somehow outlive our physical end. Becker's mission is to harmonize the chaos of modern thought, to unite psychology, philosophy, and religion into a single framework that explains why humans cannot face the one truth that defines their existence. We die. Chapter 1. Human Nature and the Heroic. Becker opens with a concept that has been deeply embedded in human history, the idea that man is, at his core, a hero. Humanity's most fundamental need, he argues, is not survival or pleasure, but heroism, the feeling that one's life has ultimate meaning, that one's existence somehow transcends the limitations of mortality. Every person, knowingly or unknowingly, constructs a sense of significance to shield themselves from the realization that they are finite, that death will one day erase them. This need to feel important, to be part of something larger than oneself, is what drives the entire structure of civilization. In childhood, this drive manifests as the hunger for validation. The child demands attention, praise, and acknowledgement, because deep down, he craves the assurance that his existence matters. As the child grows, this instinct for importance doesn't disappear, it merely transforms. Adults pursue wealth, fame, relationships, or moral virtue, all in an attempt to achieve a kind of symbolic immortality. Society, Becker suggests, is nothing more than a vast hero system, a collective stage on which individuals perform roles that give them meaning. Whether as priests, soldiers, scientists, or parents, we all seek to play a part that makes us feel indispensable. Yet the tragedy of modern life is that the old heroic frameworks, religion, honor, tradition, have crumbled. The modern individual is left stranded, aware of his mortality, but without a convincing narrative to give his life cosmic significance. Becker calls this the crisis of heroism. The modern world still demands meaning, but it can no longer provide it through faith or collective myth. As a result, people turn to smaller substitutes: money, popularity, or career success. But these offer only temporary relief from the abyss. Underneath, the terror of death still whispers, threatening to unravel everything. Becker closes this chapter by declaring that the human condition is defined by the struggle between the urge for heroism and the reality of mortality. To live meaningfully, he says, we must first understand this conflict. Chapter 2. The Terror of Death. With the groundwork of heroism laid, Becker dives into the psychological foundation of human behavior, the terror of death. He argues that the awareness of our mortality is the most profound and paralyzing fact of human existence. From the moment we develop consciousness, we realize that life is temporary, that everything we love and achieve will eventually vanish. This realization creates an unbearable anxiety that the mind cannot live with directly. To cope, we repress it. Civilization itself, Becker claims, is a grand mechanism of denial designed to protect us from this unbearable truth. Through myth, religion, and ideology, humanity has always found creative ways to soften death's sting. Ancient mystery cults promised rebirth. Christianity offered eternal life through Christ. Even modern science and progress promise that human achievement will outlast individual lives. But behind every one of these systems lies the same motive: the need to deny death. Becker draws on psychology to show how this anxiety begins in childhood. The infant's first terror is separation from the mother, an early rehearsal of death itself. As the child grows, this fear evolves into an awareness of personal vulnerability. To defend against it, the child builds what Freud called the ego, a structure of selfhood that insists, "I am safe, I am in control." This becomes the foundation for the adult's illusion of permanence. Yet repression never eliminates fear, it only hides it. The terror of death remains buried beneath every human action. We admire bravery because it symbolizes triumph over death. We follow leaders and ideologies because they promise meaning beyond mortality. We seek love because it offers a sense of union that death cannot break. The human story, Becker concludes, is not a struggle against life's difficulties. It is a desperate battle to keep death out of consciousness. Chapter 3. The Recasting of Psychoanalysis. Freud, Becker notes, was right that repression shapes human personality, but wrong about what we repress. For Freud, repression was mainly about sexual drives. Becker radically reframes this. What we truly repress is the fear of death. Our neuroses, our ambitions, even our moral systems are elaborate defenses against mortality. Becker uses psychoanalysis as a lens to reinterpret human motivation. The ego's primary role, he suggests, is not just to manage instinctual drives, but to protect us from existential dread. The superego becomes the internalized voice of culture, telling us how to act in ways that sustain our hero status. Society's moral rules, work hard, be good, succeed, are not just social expectations, but psychological shields against the fear of meaninglessness. This reinterpretation transforms psychoanalysis from a study of pathology into a theory of symbolic immortality. Every human being, consciously or unconsciously, seeks ways to matter beyond death, through children, art, fame, or even ideology. The more fragile our faith in these symbolic systems, the more anxiety and neurosis we experience. Modern man, who no longer believes in God or heaven, is thus more anxious than ever. Without eternal assurance, he must construct new illusions to justify his existence. And that is the endless project of the human psyche. Chapter 4. Human Character as a Vital Lie. Becker introduces one of his most haunting ideas. Human character itself is a lie, a vital lie, that keeps us sane. Every person constructs a worldview that hides the terrifying reality of death. We create roles, habits, and beliefs that convince us we are important, that life has structure and purpose. These lies are not malicious, they are necessary. Without them, existence would be unbearable. Character, then, is a defensive formation. Our personalities are shaped not only by genetics or upbringing, but by how much anxiety we can tolerate. Some people repress fear so effectively that they function smoothly, while others, those we call neurotic, struggle to keep their defensive walls intact. The difference is not of kind, but of degree. Every human being lives by illusion. Becker warns, however, that the vital lie comes with a price. It isolates us from truth, from each other, and from authentic living. When the protective illusion breaks, through trauma, loss, or existential crisis, anxiety surges back. What psychiatry often calls mental illness is, in Becker's view, a moment when a person can no longer maintain their denial system. Their lie collapses under the weight of reality. And yet, Becker argues, we cannot live without illusion. The challenge is not to destroy our vital lies, but to make them more conscious, to see them for what they are and choose them wisely. Chapter 5. The Psychoanalyst Kierkegaard. In this pivotal chapter, Becker turns to the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who anticipated many of his conclusions. Kierkegaard saw that human existence is a paradox. We are finite beings who long for the infinite. We live in time, but dream of eternity. This tension between the mortal and the divine creates what he called anxiety, the dizziness of freedom. For Kierkegaard, true faith is not about clinging to dogma. It is about facing despair head-on and leaping into life despite it. He understood that man's sickness is not merely psychological, but spiritual. It is the refusal to be oneself, the refusal to accept the terrifying freedom of existence. Becker embraces this idea fully. He sees Kierkegaard as the first psychoanalyst of the soul, a thinker who diagnosed humanity's deepest neurosis, the denial of death. Through Kierkegaard, Becker finds a bridge between religion and psychology. Where Freud sought to cure anxiety, Kierkegaard sought to transform it. Anxiety, he said, is the proof of our humanity, is the cost of being self-aware. To live authentically, one must confront the terror of existence and still choose to act, to love, and to believe. In doing so, man becomes what Becker calls the heroic individual, someone who accepts death and yet affirms life. In these first 5 chapters, Becker sets the foundation for his monumental thesis, that every human being, from the most devout believer to the most rational skeptic, is driven by the same need to deny death, and in doing so, to create meaning where none is guaranteed. Chapter 6. Freud's Character and His Limits. In this chapter, Becker shifts his focus to Freud himself, not merely as a theorist, but as a man. He examines Freud's worldview and the boundaries that confine it. Freud, Becker argues, had immense courage to confront human illusion, to expose the irrational drives beneath our civilized masks. But Freud's vision was still incomplete, trapped within a materialist framework that denied any genuine transcendence. Freud accepted man's mortality, but refused to go further. He saw no redemption, no higher purpose beyond the instinct for survival. Becker contends that Freud's realism was both his strength and his flaw. Freud stripped away comforting illusions, but left man naked before the abyss. For Freud, religion was merely a collective neurosis, an infantile wish for protection from a terrifying universe. What Freud failed to see, Becker insists, is that this yearning for transcendence is not childish at all. It is the very essence of humanity. The desire to rise beyond the limits of the body, to participate in something eternal, is not pathology. It is the heart of human heroism. In this sense, Freud's scientific skepticism becomes another form of denial. His faith in reason and the power of the intellect was his own immortality project, a way to outwit death through knowledge. Becker thus reinterprets Freud not as the enemy of faith, but as its tragic heir, a man who recognized the terror of life but could not take the final leap beyond it. Chapter 7. The Spell Cast by Persons, the Nexus of Unfreedom. Having dissected Freud's limits, Becker turns to one of the most subtle and universal forms of human bondage, our dependence on other people. Humans, he argues, seek not only to deny death, but to do so through others. We make people our gods, attaching ourselves to them as sources of meaning and security. Love, then, becomes one of the most powerful and dangerous illusions. We idolize our lovers, friends, and leaders, not merely out of affection, but because they serve as mirrors of our significance. To be loved is to feel immortal for a moment. The beloved becomes our symbolic link to eternity. Yet this attachment creates a paradox. In seeking liberation from death, we become enslaved to those we worship. Our freedom vanishes in the anxiety of losing them. Becker calls this the spell cast by persons. We project godlike qualities onto others, demanding from them a salvation they cannot give. The inevitable failure of this illusion leads to disappointment, jealousy, and despair. True freedom Becker argues, comes only when we recognize that no human being can bear the weight of divinity. To love authentically is to see the other as mortal and to cherish them in that fragility, not as a shield against death, but as a companion within it. This chapter also expands the concept of the hero system. Society itself thrives on interpersonal worship. We build hierarchies of idols, celebrities, leaders, revolutionaries, and invest in them the promise of significance. But every idol eventually fails, and each collapse renews the terror it was meant to suppress. The spell of persons is the oldest and most persistent illusion of humankind. Chapter 8, Otto Rank and the Closure of Psychoanalysis. Becker introduces Otto Rank, Freud's once devoted disciple and later his boldest critic. Rank, Becker insists, came closest to completing what Freud began, the creation of a truly existential psychology. Rank saw that the central conflict of life is not between the ID and the superego, or between love and aggression, but between two equally powerful needs, the need to be unique and the need to belong. From birth, the individual is torn between these drives. We want to stand out, to be irreplaceable, yet we also crave connection and union. Too much individuality leads to isolation. Too much belonging leads to suffocation. The healthy personality is one that can live within this tension, aware of both forces but not destroyed by either. Rank's greatest insight, according to Becker, was that creation itself is a symbolic act of defiance against death. Artists, thinkers, and lovers all attempt to transcend mortality through their works and relationships. Every act of creativity is a miniature rebellion, a bid for immortality. But Rank also saw that this heroism can be destructive when it denies its own roots in mortality. The artist who seeks perfection, the lover who demands eternity, the revolutionary who tries to build paradise, all are doomed by their refusal to accept limitation. By highlighting Rank, Becker argues that psychoanalysis reached its natural conclusion. Once the fear of death is recognized as the central human problem, therapy can no longer aim merely at adjustment or normality. It must help the individual face their existential condition, to live with awareness rather than illusion. Rank's vision, Becker says, closed the circle of psychoanalysis by returning it to the fundamental question of what it means to be human. Chapter 9. The Present Outcome of Psychoanalysis. In this chapter, Becker examines what became of psychoanalysis after Freud and Rank. Instead of confronting the existential terror at the heart of life, modern psychology, he argues, turned toward comfort and conformity. Therapy became a tool not for awakening but for adjustment, teaching people how to fit into society's collective denial systems. The modern patient is told to adapt, to feel normal, to manage anxiety rather than understand it. Becker denounces this trend as a betrayal of the original spirit of psychology. The goal of therapy should not be to restore illusion, but to reveal truth. Yet he acknowledges that few can live without some denial. Total confrontation with mortality can paralyze. Total repression leads to neurosis. The task of the mature person is to strike a balance, to sustain just enough illusion to live meaningfully, while remaining aware of its fragility. Becker envisions a psychology that dares to face death directly, a science of man that heals by awakening. Such therapy would not promise happiness but clarity, not comfort but courage. The true cure, he suggests, lies not in avoiding anxiety, but in learning to live creatively with it. Chapter 10. A General View of Mental Illness. Here, Becker offers one of his most radical insights. Mental illness is not a deviation from normality, but an exaggerated version of it. Every human being must deny death to function. The difference between sanity and madness lies only in how successfully one maintains this denial. The psychotic, Becker explains, cannot sustain any vital lie. Their symbolic defenses collapse completely, leaving them naked before the terror of existence. They retreat into delusion, constructing private worlds to replace the collective illusions that failed them. The neurotic, by contrast, clings desperately to fragile defenses, oscillating between awareness and denial. Even the so-called healthy person survives by repression, by accepting society's illusions as real. Thus, society itself may be the greatest asylum of all. Our religions, economies, and institutions are massive defense systems, keeping the collective fear of death at bay. When these systems falter during wars, pandemics, or social collapse, collective anxiety erupts. Madness spreads not because individuals break down, but because civilization's shared illusions do. For Becker, this understanding redefines the purpose of mental health. The aim is not to eliminate anxiety, but to integrate it. The most sane individual is not one who feels no fear, but one who knows it intimately and still chooses to act, to create, to love. Chapter 11, Psychology and Religion. What is the heroic individual? In his final and most reflective chapter, Becker brings his argument full circle. Having traced the human need for heroism, the terror of death, and the illusions that sustain life, he now asks, what does it mean to be truly heroic? Becker rejects both blind faith and cold rationalism. The true hero, he says, is not the warrior who conquers others, nor the scientist who conquers nature, but the individual who conquers himself, who faces death consciously and refuses to flee into denial. This is the existential hero, the person who accepts mortality as the condition of life and yet chooses to affirm existence. Drawing from Kierkegaard, Becker describes this as the leap of faith, not faith in dogma, but faith in life itself. The heroic individual acknowledges the absurdity of existence and still loves, still creates, still hopes. He does not escape death. He transcends the fear of it. Such a person lives with what Becker calls cosmic courage, a quiet defiance rooted not in illusion, but in awareness. Religion, in this light, regains its original function. It is not a system of rewards and punishments, but a symbolic language that gives shape to the inexpressible, the human longing to belong to something infinite. A mature religion, Becker suggests, would not promise immortality, but teach acceptance. It would sanctify mortality as the source of all beauty and meaning. Becker ends with a challenge. Civilization will continue to oscillate between illusion and despair until individuals awaken to the truth of their condition. If humanity is to survive its own hero systems, it must learn a new kind of heroism, one that embraces vulnerability, compassion, and the awareness of death. Only then can we live not as deniers of mortality, but as conscious participants in the fragile miracle of being alive. The Denial of Death is not a book about dying. It's a book about how to live. Ernest Becker challenges us to face the unbearable truth and, in doing so, discover freedom. We cannot conquer death, but we can transcend the fear of it by becoming conscious, by living authentically, and by daring to be heroic in our brief, fragile lives.